I didn't expect to spend New Year's Eve this way, alone, surrounded by half-packed bags, with a dog staring at me like he knows I'm about to leave. A few hours ago, I thought my life was fine. Not perfect, but fine. I had plans to stay in, watch some cheesy countdown show, and share a quiet moment with my wife as we rang in another year together. Instead, I'm sitting here wondering how I let myself get fooled again. The thing is, I've always been a bit cautious in relationships. Some people might call it paranoia, but I think it's just the result of experience. I've been burned before. I've had girlfriends cheat on me, and not just the one-night stand kind of cheating. No, my exes had this knack for reconnecting with their old flames, their friends, as they'd call them, until one day I'd find out those friendships were far from innocent. When I met my wife, I thought she was different. She was open, fun, and straightforward. She seemed like the type of person who wouldn't play games, who wouldn't keep secrets. We clicked in a way that made me feel safe for the first time in years. She knew about my past and even told me, "I'm not like that." I'd never do that to someone. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But last year, I got my first real taste of doubt. Her ex, let's call him Jake, was in town, and suddenly, she wasn't acting like herself. She was distracted, almost jittery. She mentioned running into him by accident at a coffee shop, and when I asked if they'd talked, she said they had a quick, awkward conversation. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, she was distant. She'd brush off my questions about how she was feeling or change the subject when I brought up Jake. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about the whole situation didn't feel right. Eventually, I asked her point-blank if she missed him, not in an accusatory way, just to understand what was going on in her head. She denied it, of course, but her face told a different story. There was this flicker of hesitation, this tiny crack in her usual confident demeanor. She said, "We were friends for a long time before we dated. I think I'm just grieving the friendship we lost." I wanted to believe her, so I let it go. But the unease lingered. I suggested we try couples therapy to work on communicating better, but she wasn't interested. "We're fine," she said. "You're just overthinking things." She laughed it off, and I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Fast forward to tonight. Things have been relatively calm between us since the Jake incident, or at least that's what I thought. A few days ago, she mentioned she'd signed up for a yoga retreat next weekend. It sounded like a great idea, honestly. She'd been stressed with work, and I thought the time away might be good for her. But when she told me about it, something felt off. She didn't have any of the usual excitement she gets when she's planning something fun. She was vague about the details, too. Said a friend had told her about it and that it was in Colorado. No specific name, no itinerary. Just, it's all last minute. I didn't question her. I told myself I was imagining things again, that I needed to trust her. But deep down, the unease was back, stronger this time. It was like a warning light flashing in the back of my mind, telling me something wasn't adding up. Tonight, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the counter. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I'd be lying if I said I hadn't done it before. I picked it up. Normally, I wouldn't unlock her phone. Despite my past, I've always tried to respect her privacy. But this time, I couldn't stop myself. The notification on the screen was all the justification I needed. It was a message from someone named Mark. The preview read, *, can't wait to finally see you this weekend. Safe travels. *. My hands weren't shaking. My breath didn't catch. It was like everything inside me went cold. I unlocked the phone and opened the conversation. What I saw confirmed every fear I'd been trying to push down for the past year. The thread was long, dating back weeks. They'd been planning to meet up for a while now. She'd told him she'd come up with an excuse to get away, that she'd make it work so they could have some time together. And there it was, her yoga retreat. A complete fabrication. Mark wasn't just some random guy, either. From what I could piece together, They'd known each other for a while. Maybe it was before she met me. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, the tone of their messages left no room for interpretation. She wasn't just catching up with an old friend. She wasn't just being polite. This was an affair. I sat there staring at the screen, not even sure what to feel. Part of me wanted to storm into the bathroom and demand answers right then and there. Another part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, how I'd let myself believe this time would be different. But most of all, I felt this strange, calm clarity. I knew, without a doubt, that my marriage was over. I hadn't even confronted her yet, but in that moment, it didn't matter. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. And as much as I hated the idea of walking away from the life we'd built together, I knew I couldn't stay with someone who would betray me like this. I took a deep breath, put the phone down, and waited for her to come out of the shower. This wasn't going to end quietly, but it was going to end. When she came out of the shower, I was sitting at the kitchen table with her phone in front of me. The steam from the bathroom followed her into the room, and she was humming some random song like it was just another night. She didn't even notice the shift in the air until I spoke. "Who's Mark?" I asked, my tone calm but firm. She froze mid-step, towel in one hand, her hair still dripping. Her eyes darted to her phone on the table, and I could see the panic ripple across her face. It wasn't just surprise. It was fear. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but her voice wavered. "I'm talking about this," I said, pushing the phone toward her. "The messages. The ones where you're planning to meet him this weekend. The ones where you lied about a yoga retreat." Her face went pale. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, try to spin some ridiculous story about how it wasn't what it looked like. But she didn't. Instead, she sat down across from me, her hands clasped tightly together, and let out a shaky breath. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" I asked, my voice steady. "Explain how you've been sneaking around behind my back. Explain how you've been planning a trip with another man while lying to my face. Go ahead. I'd love to hear this explanation." She flinched at the bluntness of my words but didn't look away. "It's not what you think," she started, but I cut her off. "Then tell me what it is," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like what I think it is. An affair. Emotional, physical. I don't care which. It's betrayal either way." Her composure cracked then, and she buried her face in her hands. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she mumbled, her voice muffled. I felt so alone, and he was there. Alone." I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "You felt alone. I'm your husband. I'm right here. You could have talked to me, but instead, you chose this? Him." She looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You don't understand. Ever since we got married, it's like you've been waiting for me to screw up. You're always watching, always suspicious. I felt like I couldn't breathe. So you decided to prove me right?" I shot back. "Because if I'm already suspicious, why not just give me a reason, right? That's what you're saying." "It wasn't like that," she snapped, her voice breaking. "I needed someone to talk to, someone who didn't see me as the bad guy. And yes, it went too far, but I didn't mean for it to. I needed to feel like someone cared." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "You needed to feel like someone cared?" "I cared. I've always cared. But apparently, that wasn't enough for you." "Why Mark?" I finally asked. "How do you even know him?" She hesitated, then sighed. "We met a couple of years ago. Before I met you. He was someone I used to talk to. It wasn't serious back then, but we stayed in touch. And when things got hard between us." "When did things get hard?" I interrupted. "You mean when I suggested therapy? When I tried to help us communicate better? Was that hard for you?" She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. You've got some nerve, you know that? Blaming this on me. Blaming this on us. Like you had no choice but to run to him. Do you even hear yourself? I'm not blaming you, she said softly. I know I screwed up. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to make you see me differently. See you differently? I repeated, my voice filled with disbelief. You're the one who changed how I see you. Not me. You lied. You cheated. That's on you, not me. She didn't argue. She just sat there, staring at her hands like she didn't know what to say next. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. This marriage might only be 6 months old, but you've already managed to destroy it. Congratulations. She flinched at my words but didn't try to stop me as I walked out of the room. I went straight to the bedroom, grabbed my suitcase, and started packing. The whole time, I kept waiting for her to come after me, to say something, anything, to make me reconsider. But she didn't. When I came back out, she was still sitting at the table, staring at her phone like it might hold the answers she was looking for. She didn't even look up as I set the suitcase by the door. I'll be gone by morning, I said, my voice cold. I'll send someone to pick up the rest of my things later. She nodded, her shoulders slumping, but still didn't say a word. I walked over to the couch, sat down, and stared at the dog curled up in his bed. He lifted his head, his big brown eyes full of confusion, and for the first time that night, I felt a pang of regret, not for her but for him. He didn't deserve this chaos. None of us did. Tomorrow, I'll leave this house and this marriage behind. But tonight, I'll sit here and try to figure out how everything went so wrong. After sitting on the couch for what felt like an eternity, staring at the dim glow of the kitchen light reflecting off her phone still lying on the table, I decided I wasn't done. Leaving her in silence, letting her stew in guilt, wasn't enough. I needed closure. I needed to know why she thought this was acceptable, why she thought I wouldn't notice, why she thought our marriage wasn't worth fighting for. I stood up and walked back into the kitchen. She didn't look up right away, but when she finally did, her face was a mess of red, puffy eyes and tear-streaked cheeks. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Explain it to me, I said firmly, crossing my arms. I want to hear everything. No dodging, no excuses. Just the truth. She sniffled and wiped at her face with the back of her hand, looking exhausted. I already told you. No, I interrupted sharply. You didn't. You danced around it. I want the truth, all of it. How long has this been going on? What exactly happened between you and Mark? And more importantly, why? She hesitated, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the right words. Finally, she sighed and leaned back in her chair, looking up at the ceiling as if it might provide some kind of divine inspiration. We started talking again a few months ago, she admitted. It was just casual at first. He messaged me on social media, and I didn't think much of it. We were friends once, you know? I thought it was harmless. Harmless, I said, raising an eyebrow. Texting him behind my back, planning secret trips. When exactly did it stop being harmless? Her gaze dropped to the table, and she fiddled with the corner of a napkin. I don't know, she said quietly. It just happened. He asked how I was doing, and I guess I needed someone to talk to. Things between us felt so strained. Strained. I repeated, incredulous. How? Because I tried to address the tension? Because I suggested therapy? Because I was paying attention to the fact that you were acting off? That's what you call strained. It wasn't just that, she said, her voice trembling. You're so intense sometimes. Like you're always waiting for me to mess up, and I felt like I couldn't do anything right. Mark was just easier. He didn't judge me. He didn't make me feel like I was walking on eggshells all the time. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. So your solution to feeling judged was to lie to me and cheat on me? Makes perfect sense. I didn't cheat, she blurted out, her voice suddenly defensive. We didn't even. Stop, I said, cutting her off. Don't insult me by trying to redefine what cheating is. You lied. You planned to meet him behind my back. You hid it. Whether you've slept with him or not doesn't change the fact that you betrayed me. Her mouth snapped shut, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator. She looked down at her hands, twisting them together, and whispered, I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice steady. You made choices. You could have come to me. You could have talked to me about how you were feeling. But instead, you chose him. You chose lies. And now, here we are. She looked up at me then, her eyes pleading. I don't know why I did it. I wish I could take it back. I wish I could fix this. I stared at her, my jaw tightening. You don't get to wish it away. This isn't something you can just undo with a few tears and an apology. Trust isn't a light switch you can flick back on when it's convenient for you. It's gone, and you're the one who broke it. Her face crumpled, and she buried it in her hands again. I know, she sobbed. I know I messed up. I don't know how to fix it, but I'll do anything. Please, just tell me what to do. I took a deep breath, my resolve hardening. What you do is your choice. But as far as I'm concerned, this marriage is over. She froze, her hands still covering her face. Slowly, she looked up at me, her expression one of utter devastation. No, she whispered. Please, don't say that. We can work through this. We can go to therapy. We can. We can't, I said firmly. Because therapy only works when both people are honest and committed. You've proven you're neither. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. You're really leaving? Yes, I said without hesitation. I can't stay with someone who would do this to me. I deserve better. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face, as I turned and walked out of the kitchen. In that moment, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was anger, of course, and sadness. But there was also a sense of clarity, a realization that this chapter of my life was coming to an end. And while it hurt, it was also freeing in a way. Tomorrow, I'll walk out the door and leave this house, and this marriage, behind. But for now, I'll sit here with the dog, letting the silence settle around me like a heavy blanket, and try to prepare myself for whatever comes next. The house was quiet after our confrontation, but it wasn't a peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, pressing down on everything around me. The dog had curled up beside me on the couch, his steady breathing the only sign of normalcy in a night that had turned my world upside down. I sat there, staring at nothing, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. It's hard to describe what I felt in those moments. Anger. Sure. Sadness. Absolutely. But mostly, there was this overwhelming sense of loss. I'd spent so much time building a life with her, investing in our future, believing we were on the same team. And now, it was like all of that had been wiped away in an instant. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization that this wasn't just about her and Mark. It was about everything leading up to this moment. Every time I'd tried to address the distance between us, every time I'd suggested therapy, every time I'd asked her if something was wrong. I'd been trying to fix a marriage she wasn't even fully committed to, and I hadn't seen it until now. I thought back to all the little things that hadn't added up over the past year. The way she'd dismissed my concerns about her ex. The way she'd brushed off my suggestions to work on our communication. The way she'd seemed distant at times, like she was somewhere else entirely. I'd chalked it up to normal relationship struggles, convinced myself we could work through it. But now, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd been blind to the warning signs all along. There was a part of me that wanted to blame myself. Maybe I'd been too cautious, too paranoid because of my past. Maybe my insecurities had pushed her away, made her feel like she couldn't be honest with me. But then I reminded myself that her actions weren't my fault. I'd done everything I could to be a good husband. I'd been open about my feelings, tried to create a space where we could talk about anything. If she chose to lie and betray my trust, that was on her, not me. As the hours passed, I cycled through a whirlwind of emotions. There were moments when I felt a surge of anger, thinking about all the ways she'd deceived me. There were moments when I felt a deep sadness, mourning the future we'd planned together. And then there were moments of clarity, where I could see the situation for what it was. A relationship that had been broken long before tonight. At some point, I realized I couldn't stay in that house any longer. The memories were suffocating me. The laughter we'd shared in the living room, the quiet mornings in the kitchen, the plans we'd made for the future. It all felt hollow now, tainted by her betrayal. I stood up, grabbed my suitcase, and headed for the door. The dog followed me, his tail wagging hesitantly, as if he could sense that something was wrong. I knelt down and scratched behind his ears, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "You take care of her, okay?" I whispered. "She's going to need you." He licked my hand, and for a moment, I felt like he understood. Leaving him behind was almost as hard as leaving her, but I knew it was the right thing to do. He belonged with her, and I couldn't take that away from either of them. When I stepped outside, the cold night air hit me like a slap in the face. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens in the middle of the night when the rest of the world is asleep. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in, before walking to my car and loading my suitcase into the trunk. As I sat behind the wheel, staring at the empty road ahead, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was sadness, of course. A deep, aching sadness that felt like it would never go away. But there was also a flicker of something else. Strength. Clarity. The realization that this wasn't the end of my story, just the end of a chapter. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let this break me. I'd been through heartbreak before, and I'd come out the other side stronger. This time would be no different. As I drove away, leaving behind the house that had once felt like a home, I made a promise to myself. I promised that I would take the time to heal, to rebuild, to figure out what I wanted for my life. And I promised that I wouldn't let this experience define me. Tomorrow, I'll start the process of moving forward. But tonight, I'm allowing myself to feel everything. The pain, the anger, the loss. Because as much as it hurts, I know that this is what healing looks like. When I woke up the next morning, the weight of the previous night hit me all over again. I'd slept in my car, parked in a quiet lot near a park, unsure of where else to go. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a pale light over the empty street, and for a moment, I sat there, staring at the world outside and wondering how it had all unraveled so quickly. But as much as it hurt, there was also a sense of clarity. I wasn't going back. Not to the house, not to her, not to the life we'd built on a foundation that was already cracking beneath our feet. The decision was made. I wasn't going to waste another second trying to fix something she had already destroyed. I spent the morning making calls. First, I reached out to a close friend, a guy I've known since college, who offered me a place to crash while I figured things out. Then I called a lawyer. I didn't want to drag this out any longer than necessary. 6 months into a marriage and I was already looking at divorce papers, but I knew it was the right thing to do. When I arrived at my friend's place, he greeted me with a mixture of concern and understanding. "You did the right thing," he said after I explained everything. "Walking away takes guts, especially when it's someone you care about. But you deserve better than this." His words stuck with me. 4 years, I'd been telling myself that I wasn't enough, that my past, my insecurities, and my baggage made me difficult to love. But now, I was starting to realize that the problem wasn't me. It was her choices, her dishonesty, her unwillingness to face our issues head-on. Over the next few days, I threw myself into the practicalities of moving forward. I finalized the paperwork for the divorce, arranged to have the rest of my things picked up from the house, and started looking for a place of my own. It was exhausting, emotionally and physically, but it was also liberating. Every step I took felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd lost somewhere along the way. But the emotional journey wasn't as straightforward. There were moments when the sadness hit me like a tidal wave, when I thought about the life we'd planned, the promises we'd made, and the love I thought we shared. There were nights when I lay awake, replaying our conversations in my head, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. And then there were moments of anger at her for betraying me, at Mark for stepping into a marriage that wasn't his to ruin, and even at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. But that anger eventually gave way to something else. Acceptance. I realized that holding on to resentment wouldn't help me heal. It wouldn't undo the past or change what had happened. The only thing I could control was how I chose to move forward. And I chose to let go, not for her, but for me. Looking back, I've learned some hard but valuable lessons from this experience. Trust isn't just about believing someone won't betray you. It's about feeling secure enough to open up, to communicate, to face challenges together. And as much as it hurts to admit, trust is also something that can't be rebuilt once it's shattered. I've also learned that love isn't enough to sustain a relationship. It takes effort, honesty, and a willingness to face the messy, uncomfortable parts of life together. Without that foundation, even the strongest love will eventually crumble. So, here I am, starting over at 32. It's scary, sure. The thought of putting myself out there again, of opening my heart to someone new, feels almost impossible right now. But I know I'll get there. I know I'll heal, and when I do, I'll be ready for something better, something real. For anyone reading this who's been in a similar situation, my advice is simple. Know your worth. Don't settle for someone who makes you feel like you're not enough, who prioritizes their own desires over your trust and respect. It's hard to walk away, but sometimes it's the only way to find peace. Do you think I did the right thing? Let me know in the comments. I could use the advice.